Welcome back, guests. We have a unique show for you today. Mike and Kate, our two top managers at Hotel Pacifico, are making trips of their own this week and can't be with us. Kate's on some important business in Europe, in the UK, and Mike McDonald is on some well-deserved personal time also in Europe. So that's left it to me to put together the show. Those are big shoes to fill, but I think we have some outstanding guests to join me to rake through the ashes one more time, do a deeper dive into the federal election results, particularly as they affect BC. And there's going to be a lot of repercussions. I mean, in the week since the vote, we've already seen the NDP leader resign, Pierre Poilievre move to a new seat, becoming an MP from Alberta. Mark Carney's, as we speak, meeting President Trump. So we've got three very experienced people with good backgrounds in British Columbia and federal politics to take a look at this with us. So from Winnipeg, Manitoba, the only person I know has served as chief of staff to the NDP premiers of both Manitoba and BC. We have Bob Dewar. Bob was chief of staff to Manitoba Premier Gary Dewar from 1999 to 2003. He came to BC in 2016 to play the same role for John Horgan. He was a key figure in the CASA negotiations that followed the 2017 election and was a special advisor to Horgan until 2022. But I think most critically, Bob, you were our first ever guest at Hotel Pacifico. So welcome back. You know, there's some things you can never do twice, and that's one, be the first guest. So also back for repeat visit is Caroline Elliott, longtime political activist on the right side of BC politics, a political scientist and university instructor, one-time vice president of BC United, and now a conservative supporter and a frequent contributor to the Hub, which I understand is Canada's leading source for conservative analysis and political commentary. So welcome back, Caroline.
Thank you for having me, Geoff.
And last but far from least, welcome to Brittney Kerr, a first-time guest on Hotel Pacifico and a founding partner of FramePoint Public Affairs. She's a respected veteran in the government relations field, and she served as national campaign co-chair for the Liberal Party of Canada, as well as serving a stint as BC advisor in the office of the Prime Minister under Justin Trudeau. So welcome to the show, Brittney.
Hello, thank you.
Great. So with the election now behind us, we're going to spend the whole show going back and taking a more long-range perspective on what happened, but focusing on the future for the most part. What happened and how that's going to shape what happens next in BC. So let's jump in. And I thought I'd just arbitrarily pick Bob to go first, who had the worst outcome, and then go from that to the least worst outcome, because everybody had some disappointments on election night. So Bob, wow, NDP incumbents falling everywhere, including leader Jagmeet Singh in Burnaby, came third in his own riding and resigned. So take a look at it from your perspective. You also worked on many federal campaigns and know the federal party very well. What's in store for Canada's New Democrats, and what do you think are the lessons for David Eby's team?
Thanks, Geoff. Well, it was a tough night. I mean, there's no denying that. It was a tough campaign. I think leading into it, one of the things that, we knew it was going to be a tough campaign, especially with the resignation of Justin Trudeau and the Liberals coalescing around Mark Carney and, the Black Swan that's down south of us, who, inserted himself into the election. And, we can talk back and forth whether it was the most vote determining. I think it was in a lot of our seats. The most vote determining, and it was very difficult to really fight against that, because that's all what people want to hear, and they wanted to know who would be the best person standing up to Donald Trump. And as we saw, Mark Carney was the person in our polling, public domain polling, and that became, an issue that people wanted to talk about. People are afraid. Were afraid during this campaign about what was going to happen. They listened to him go on and on about Canada and wanting, to annex it. And people were concerned about that. And they wanted somebody to step up for them and do that. Then we realized in the beginning of the campaign, as we, first week, that this was going to be really tough for us to not get shut out of the discussion, not get shut out on what we're going to try and do. What we tried to accomplish during the campaign, and I don't think we were able to accomplish it, the way we wanted to, was going into our incumbent seats and keep our incumbent seats. We had 25 incumbent seats from the last campaign. We'd lost one as a resignation when Garrison stepped down. So we were at 24 seats. Right. So we were trying to do that. We ended up getting 7 seats in it, which was lower than party status, which was very disappointing. But we've been here before. I'm old enough to be around for what happened in 1993 when we were down to 9 seats, and we will build up. It will be difficult. Last night they announced the interim party leader. It will be Don Davies from Vancouver Kingsway, which is a good choice. I think Don has got the experience he needs to do. I think one of the first things he needs to do is sit down with the committee in the House of Commons to see if there's any chance of us trying to get changing the rules so we get party status at 6 seats. I think that's really critical for us to be able to sit on committees, to be able to actually participate. Don't know what will come of that. We're not asking, the party will not be asking for, we're not making a deal with the Liberals or anything like that. It's just to get party status and to be able to participate fully in the House of Commons. From that, I think it means that we have to go out there and listen to what was going on. There's been a lot of, wringing of our hands on losing voters, losing, the so-called working class voters. And I think we have to address that and see what's going on around that from our base. I would differ in saying that that's all that is happening, that people are now, workers are now voting Conservative. I just take the example of where we lost in Windsor West, Brian Massey, an incumbent. The Tory vote, I think, went up 1 or 2%, but the Liberal vote went up 10%. And with that split, the Conservative candidate won. So we have to look at that and have a serious discussion about that. We also have to look at where people are at, go to where people are and start listening to them. I think that, a lot of times politicians think they have the ideas and stuff and it becomes top down. We have to be bottom up more and listen to people's concerns. I've said this before, and I've said this to you, Geoff, is I think people are suffering from sort of the post-pandemic blues. They all took 2 years off, or, had to stop what they were doing for 2 years, came out of it and said, okay, now that that's over, where's the reward for this? What happens to me and my family after doing this whole thing through the pandemic? And they came out and found everything was more expensive. Services were lower. And people just go, what's going on? And so their households, the way they feel and everything was discombobulated. And then their trust for any institution went into the toilet. Institutions, if you talk to people, including political institutions. So we have to get those people and talk to them and see what's going on. As far as British Columbia is concerned and the lessons for there, we had an election in October in British Columbia, not dissimilar to the federal outcome with 2 parties. If you look at the actual results, I think in BC in the federal election, both the Conservatives and the Liberals got 42% of the vote. In the fall election, the NDP got 45%, the Conservatives got 43%. So it's not that different in that the Liberals are not a factor provincially, and we're not a factor in this federal campaign, which we have to build back from. So I think that we can look at that and see from that what we have to continue to do. And I really believe that that's listening to people and be there where they are at.
Guess, can we talk about cow burps for a moment? No, for real, because cow burps are at the forefront of reducing methane emissions from cattle. And they're doing it with the help of digital solutions developed and enabled by TELUS Agriculture and world-class PhD nutritionists and veterinarians. Using science, they're helping producers significantly reduce nitrous oxide emissions and reducing carbon intensity by continuously optimizing cattle performance. It comes down to technology-supported tracking that gives precise data on livestock that can inform feeding and diet composition, right down to what balance of fat and protein any individual animal might need. This is not only reducing emissions annually, but it's also supporting financial year ends for feedlot operators. Since 2012, TELUS Agriculture's feedlot clients have generated over 210,000 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent GHG offset credits. That's just a really complicated way of saying they've managed the equivalent of removing the emissions from over 45,000 vehicles. And it's yet one more example of all the ways TELUS is innovating across sectors here in BC and Canada.
Let's go back to you mentioned it in passing, and I'm sure it's part of the discussion we'll have for the rest of the show, but the split in NDP support that went at least in part to the Liberals, at least in part to the Conservatives, was a surprise for a lot of commentators. How does that resonate for you, Caroline? I mean, your leader lost his seat, but is now but remains the leader. So a very different situation from the NDP, and saw many of the other metrics improve. What takeaways do you have a week after that you think are going to guide the Conservatives forward here?
Well, I think, if you'd asked me this question in November or December and we had this outcome, I would have been really disappointed, right? It's far below what the expectations were a few months ago, but the landscape shifted significantly. And Bob mentioned, the individual down south who had an outsized impact on our election. Trump's threats of tariffs, but particularly his 51st state talk. I think a lot of Canadians were very, very concerned about it. There was a rally around the flag aspect to it. There was also a question of kind of perceived competence around a banker and his economic credentials that he brought to the table. And I think just so many things shifted. And I should also mention the very significant fact that Trudeau obviously resigned and Carney came in the first place, which also changed the game quite a lot. I mean, the Conservatives have spent a great deal of time in the years prior framing the entire election almost around Trudeau and the carbon tax, right? And those two things disappeared and Trump entered the scene. And so just huge shifts that changed the way we might expect the Conservatives to perform. So under the circumstances and coming out of kind of where things have been more recently, the results disappointing. But I think there are some real achievements that Pierre can point to that took place under his leadership. And we've talked a little bit about these already. 20 plus new seats, the highest proportion of the popular vote since 1988 under Mulroney. A very broadened coalition of the collection of people who would even consider voting Conservative. It's quite interesting to see the working class element, the multi-ethnic element, the younger element. These are groups that people have not traditionally looked at and thought these are conservative voters. And here the Conservatives are finding those folks, finding their message resonating with them. So I think that those are the achievements Pierre can point to. And he lost his seat, and that's again, it's disappointing, but I don't think it's a showstopper. I really don't. I was on a panel with Brittney actually this weekend, and I said the same thing, which is in British Columbia, we're very familiar with this, with Christy Clark losing her seat in 2013, and she went and she ran in Kelowna, and she went on to govern, and it was honestly long-term a bit of a blip. And and the interesting thing is with Pierre running in Alberta, I think there's going to be an interesting dynamic there. I think is just what actually Alberta might need is somebody based out of Alberta, bringing those concerns right to the top in Ottawa and being able to articulate them in a way where they actually feel that representation that they feel that they're lacking right now. But also taking that kind of the benefits of Canadian federalism message back from Ottawa to Alberta and saying, look what I can do for you. Look what this country represents. These are the benefits of this great place. So I think, anyway, there's a whole bunch of different elements that we can expand on in the conversation, but those are some of the things that have jumped out to me.
Thanks. But Brittney, the Liberals were also disappointed, but you had the opposite of a near-death experience. I guess it was a Lazarus-like experience. Somebody stretched out a hand and the party rose from the grave and didn't quite get across the finish line you're hoping with a majority government. But it looks like Prime Minister Carney is acting as if he got a majority anyway. Is that what you see happening next?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that there are differing views on whether or not the prime minister should govern like he's in a majority. But we're in pretty extenuating times right now. I think that while the electoral results were, fairly evenly split, we can talk about the electoral results here in British Columbia in particular. There's a lot of goodwill for the prime minister. Even conservative voters that we talk to anecdotally will say, I'm hoping he's successful. Like we need him to be successful. Whether or not they have all the confidence that he will be, I think there's a lot of goodwill. So I think he's gotta govern like he has a majority.
What does that mean for BC though, Brittany? I mean, we see David Eby, being kind and trying to get along with Mark Carney, just the way John Horgan did with Justin Trudeau. What are the specific things you think he's going to have to pay attention to in BC that would make a difference and consolidate that support?
Yeah, you know what? I'll be short and sweet. My colleague Jeff Ferrier said this really well. He summarized it really well. Horgan and Carney, they do have a lot in common. Both technocrats, serious people, policy heavy. And let's face it, BC remains only one of two provinces in the West who appears to be willing to engage constructively. So I do have confidence that the working relationship between Canada and BC will continue in a constructive way. But you know what? It's tough for BC. It's tough for us. When I worked in the Prime Minister's office, I felt it acutely. The Rocky Mountains are real. It's really difficult to get British Columbia's interests heard in Ottawa. The distance between us on the West Coast in British Columbia, it's real. I mean, and what's the most important thing in politics? To be successful in politics, the thing is relationships. That's all it ever boils down to. So how do we cultivate strong relationships between Canada and BC, both folks in the PMO and folks in the PO in the Premier's office? Well, proximity matters. I mean, they've got to do regular in-person engagement, both at the elected level and staff level. And this is a really important role for BC caucus. We've had 20 MPs elected on the Liberal side. It's unprecedented. We've never had that many. It's funny when we think about, I feel like everyone always said Paul Martin was like the Liberal that British Columbia loved. And I think we got 6 seats in 2006 or 2004. We have 20. Under Trudeau, we had, what was it, I think 15, 17. Like, these are really, really big numbers for the Liberal Party in this last decade. And the role of BC caucus is so, it's critical. And I'm not sure that they were as effective at representing British Columbia's interests, or I should say as effective as they could have been given their size and gravitas. And I'm really hopeful that the folks around the table this time will do the hard work that's needed to make sure that BC is on the agenda.
Well, Brittany, I could say that anybody who's been in your role or my role or Bob's role, working with Ottawa at the political level can endorse your comments about how we could do better. It's never been clear to me how we will, but it's a big challenge right now, given that softwood lumber was never resolved, even though it was outside the current tariff disputes. And we just got a hammer blow this morning from Trump with the film tariff, whatever that turns out to be, a devastating blow to a hell of a lot of workers. So a lot of work to do there. But Bob, I want to come back to the NDP situation, much as it pains me to do so, because I think people are writing the epitaph of the NDP here, but also saying that probably we're seeing a change to two-party politics at the federal level, the way we've seen it at the provincial level, at least in the Western provinces. So, what do you think? What advice would you give to Don Davies, who is from BC, but what would you say is going to have to be the strategic goal of the party leadership in the days ahead if it's going to avoid just simply disappearing?
I think what he has to do is to, and it's not just Don. I think it's party activists, etc. We do have 2 NDP governments. We have 6 provincial governments that were the official opposition. I think he's got to tap into those leaderships, because we're in a case where we have to go out and talk to people and rebuild our allies within civil society, and I think that's something that he has to work on. So I think it's tapping into the provincial sections that are already organized and very well organized. And
just remind us when the permanent leader may be picked. I mean, it's a one person, one vote membership decision.
Yeah, and that will go to federal council. So they haven't met yet. So the executive and federal council will make that decision, and the rules around it. So I expect that would be in the next month or so that they will get. I think there's a council coming up in a month. So there'll be discussion there. I don't think there's a rush to get going on the leadership selection right away. I think today in Winnipeg, Wab Kinew said that he will not be seeking the federal leadership. As David Eby said, I think the day after the election. So you know, I've had a lot of emails asking me about those two men, and but you know, what happened before is, you know, in 93, Alexa McDonough came forward and and we started to build back that way. And after she stepped down, Jack Layton, who wanted to do it. So we have to find somebody out there that's got, you know, some fire in their belly that actually wants to do this and go out there and talk to Canadians and actually listen to them. I always tell politicians that we have 2 ears for a reason and 1 mouth. You got to use those 2 ears to listen to people before you start opening your mouth. And I think that that's something that we have to do more of. We tend to hypothesize on how people are thinking too much and not get back to basics where I think people are at.
Just explain how much they'd love what we're going to do once we've done it. But
Yeah,
Caroline,
exactly.
to look at the conservative situation, I think has got some intriguing dynamics because the NDP has a situation which is probably unique, which is that if you're a member of the provincial wing, you're automatically a member of the federal wing. In BC, the BC Conservative Party is a separate organization from the federal organization, but the federal organization had a big gain in BC, which was hard fought and also included some of those working class voters we're talking about. What should Poilievre be looking at, or his team, to build on that and consolidate some of those changes?
I think they, excuse me. I think what was interesting, and you mentioned the affiliation between the provincial NDP and the federal NDP, and of course, there's no similar affiliation between the BC Conservatives and the federal Conservatives, but the BC Conservatives, and this is slightly off the point of your question, but I did want to point it out before I forgot. The BC Conservatives did, though, like wholeheartedly endorse Pierre's party, the Conservatives, in this election. And I thought it was such an interesting dynamic. And I know you've talked about this a little bit on a previous episode, where previously in the BC Liberals, which is, as we all know, a coalition of federal Liberals, mostly and Conservatives, not mostly federal Liberals, but generally a coalition of federal Liberals and federal Conservatives, they always shied away from endorsing a federal pick, and people were the elected officials were quite discouraged from taking an active role in saying who they supported. And it was interesting seeing the BC Conservatives saying, okay, well, we are just unapologetically conservative, and we're going out there and we're endorsing the Conservative Party. And it's an interesting thing because I can't help but think, what does this mean provincially? When, if you are like, is it a message that they're no longer interested in attracting some of the more, like, if there's such thing like blue Liberals over into their governing coalition? And is that number of people on the provincial scene enough to actually form a majority government? There are questions I don't really have the answer to, but it just struck me as an interesting dynamic. But so anyway, back to the actual question you were asking. What can they do? I mean, one thing is to leverage. I think there is definitely some mutual networks and tools that can be employed by the efficiencies that can be found between the federal Conservatives and the BC Conservatives acting together in some ways. Working with some of the networks that their people have on the ground, whether it's MLAs or organizers and those things, into some of those multi-ethnic communities where we saw the BC Conservatives make some gains, for example, in Surrey, places like that. Working with those communities to find folks who are willing to be leaders and reach out further into those demographics and pull people in and welcome them to that tent. There's also on the kind of working class side, we saw, for example, Aaron Gunwin in the North Island. So working through to figure out, are there other opportunities with similar dynamics in ridings that they didn't succeed in, where they could grow out and succeed in for the next time. The other thing that they're going to have to do, of course, is reach out into ridings they previously held that they no longer do. So South Surrey White Rock comes to mind. Kelowna, Tracy Gray, for example, those were two very prominent members of the caucus who didn't succeed in their re-election bid. So figuring out how they can reclaim those against some sort of demographic headwinds that might be a bit difficult for them, those ridings. Well, at least South Surrey White Rock, I know a little bit better. older demographic, more educated demographic, more affluent demographic. Those are all things that were indicators of a potential Liberal supporter that Carrie Lynn Finley would have been fighting against. So they're going to have to figure out how to recoup that.
One thing that your campaign was not short of was caucus discipline. But that's been a problem for John Rustad. And, I just have to mention Eleanor Sturko to point that out. Do you think that's something that has been a break maybe on the federal party's fortunes with some of the disarray, the departures from the provincial caucus? I mean, maybe background noise only, but not helpful.
It's such an interesting question because I was just actually on CBC this morning and I was asked about some of the discipline around the implication in the question I was asked there was, are you like, the amount of discipline they were saying was far too high. The candidates essentially, in their words, were muzzled from attending debates and weren't allowed to take part in one-on-one media interviews and things like that. And they were saying, isn't that a really bad thing? And generally speaking, I think, you should, your candidates should be out in the communities taking part, in my view, in all candidates' debates. And I think that they should have allowed more leeway for that. But at the same time, they completely avoided what we like to call bozo eruptions, right? Where the BC Conservatives really suffered from that in their election, where people were saying things off the cuff or whatever that were getting picked up on camera. And in fact, the media itself, I think there's a little bit of culpability in the sense that they say, well, why aren't the MP or the candidates allowed to take part in these debates? And it's like, well, because you rigorously film them and then blast it all over the place when they go off message for 30 seconds. And so like there is like a disincentive because we come down so hard on these folks who are not always super well versed in every single issue, but being asked to speak on them. So a long way of saying, I think there's a balance between discipline and avoiding people just taking you way off message. And I think Pierre's team came down much harder on the discipline side and said, we're going to kind of rule this with a bit of an iron fist and keep people in line and avoid those things. John Rustad has taken almost the exact opposite approach where he says, look, we're a free speech caucus and we're going to let people say what they want. And if we end up off message sometimes, well, that's fine. So those are two very different approaches and people can weigh which one makes more sense. I think there's pros and cons.
I think if you were to ask the NDP caucus, they would favor a Rustad strategy. But
yes.
Brittney, what it's sort of difficult for you because Prime Minister Carney's out there saying what he's going to do. But from a BC perspective, again, are there specific things you would be trying to put in place or recommending to him to put in place? BC is a very important part of the victory that they were able to fashion on election night. What more needs to be done?
I think, and we talked a little bit about relationships and how much that matters in politics. Geoff, if we can talk about sort of what Carney needs to demonstrate to British Columbia in the way of who he surrounds himself with. We under Prime Minister Trudeau had a heck of a lot of seats, more than we had ever had in generations. And we only ever had 4 ministers. It was not proportionate to the population in the province, nor I think even our seat count. So I'm really hopeful that the Prime Minister, when he's designing his cabinet, which he's doing right now, or I should say maybe not right now while he's in DC, but certainly this week, and we'll find out who he's chosen next week. I'm really hopeful that we have some solid representation from British Columbia, and maybe we can talk about, who some of those folks might be and how they can advocate for BC's interests.
Gas or electric? How about all the above? Lately, I've been talking about how much we rely upon our province's gas and electricity systems working together. We need both systems working together to safely, reliably, and affordably meet the needs of British Columbians. And if you're a FortisBC customer that qualifies, you can have all of the above, gas and electric. Last year, FortisBC introduced a new rebate program for eligible customers who replaced their home's older gas heating system with an electric heat pump and high-efficiency furnace. Sure, I'll do a fist pump over a heat pump, especially when paired with a high-efficiency furnace. How's that work? A dual fuel system or hybrid provides whole home heating and cooling and is a good option for homeowners who are replacing an aging gas furnace and want to upgrade to a reliable and efficient system, keeping their home comfortable year-round. It includes an electric heat pump for cooling during warm weather and space heating during milder conditions, and a high-efficiency gas furnace for heating during those cold BC winter days. So just like our provincial energy systems, you get the advantages of both gas and electricity at the household level to ensure your home energy remains affordable, efficient, and reliable. Kind of like a hybrid car, gas and electric working together. This dual fuel offering is part of FortisBC's commitment to offer the next generation of rebates for high-efficiency technologies and systems to help achieve provincial climate action goals by harnessing the strengths of both energy systems. Find a full list of rebates and energy efficiency information at fortisbc.com/rebates. FortisBC, energy for a better BC and a better podcast.
One of the things that I'm curious about is what happens as a result of Trump and the new emphasis on economic policy and your caucus with regard to things like fish farming, which was a torture for the last number of years. Fish farming was going to be shut down. We had that announcement repeatedly. We had a lot of pushback from First Nations and so on. And another example, which the Conservatives, I think, did very well with, was fossil fuel development and the perception, in spite of TMX, that the federal Liberal Party is opposed to that and actually has no pipeline bills, that kind of thing. Do you expect Carney to make moves to, spike those guns a bit to settle those issues once and for all?
Yeah, look, I mean, maybe setting aside those specific issues, he has to, we have to be prepared to make concessions in areas that to date the federal Liberal Party has not been willing to make concessions around. And if we're talking about major projects, energy infrastructure, even the cap, I mean, we are in a position today that if we don't do those things, then we are in a world of hurt, 6 months, 12, 18 months out. And what does that timeline coincide with? Well, likely the next federal election. So jobs, the economy, I mean, these are things that the Prime Minister, he has a political imperative to demonstrate progress on. He has fiscal pressures to do the same, that we've never seen before too. But I think he's personally motivated around those issues. So I think we're going to see a lot of change, and I think he has to demonstrate change.
But I'm going to jump a bit ahead because I think this is a great point to do it. Mark Carney has said repeatedly in his first news conference, and I'll just quote it, "Our old relationship," that's with the United States, "is based on steadily increasing integration, and it's over. The integration is over." I mean, ever since I've been paying attention to politics, it's been the holy grail of Canadian economic strategy to increase integration through free trade and so on. So that's a dramatic statement. He says the questions now are how our nations will cooperate in the future and where we in Canada will move on from the relationship to build strong partnerships with other countries instead of the US. So is that even possible, Brittney? I mean, given, a half century of economic integration, and how does he get a mandate to do that? Because he got a mandate to stand up for Canada. I'm not sure that Canadians had a view of specific issues that could occur like this. So what do you think is happening inside the leadership at this point? Or is it just a Carney wish statement at this point?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. Diversification has been something that we've talked about as a country for some time. British Columbia is obviously in more of an enviable position than other provinces like Ontario in terms of, in terms of that. The challenge I think we have is, no, it can't be done overnight. And the Prime Minister needs to demonstrate change like ASAP. So, yes, let's put in the work today to, see the fruits of our labor later. But he also doesn't have the luxury of time. We don't have the luxury of time. And so, and I think it's interesting because, of course, we're seeing that even with President Trump, all of everything that he's doing. I mean, he's talking about it's going to take like a decade to actually see these things realized. And the same goes for us here domestically. So, I mean, it's really tough, but I mean, I don't know, like maybe for Prime Minister Carney, we're going to see someone who's willing not to take such a myopic, view in terms of policy that needs to be introduced the way that typical prime ministers have historically done.
Yeah, maybe I'll come back to you,
it's a dilemma.
Caroline, I thought Pierre Poilievre had in this respect, a more modest position, which was we would seek to renegotiate a trade deal that was favorable to Canada. That was more or less the tone I got. If you looked at this question of whether or not we're going to disaggregate our relationship, that's a much, in my view, more dramatic pledge to build up our sovereignty and so on than what Polyev was saying, which is I'm going to focus on your concerns about affordability and about housing and drugs and crime, but also try to get a decent trade deal. What's your take on this statement by the Prime Minister, and how do you think the Conservative team will respond?
Well, I think Pierre's kind of stance on this issue was more than that, though. I think he talked a lot about market diversification in the sense that we need to be able to build the pipelines. We need to, I mean, that was one of his like short catchphrases, right? Like build the pipelines, do the things necessary to be able to diversify from the US, I think was kind of the trajectory he wanted to get to, but also renegotiate and land somewhere that's fair to Canada. And so I think it's a bit of both, and I don't think it should be one or the other. I think you want to do both. But I also, just going back to Carney's commitments, I mean, he is saying a lot of the right things, and I'm pleased, and I hope Brittney's right that maybe he will take a bit of a different trajectory than the party historically has on some of these issues. But at the same time, he does remain committed to things like C-69, the no new pipelines law, as people call it in regular words. He doesn't want to budge on the moratorium on oil tankers on the North Coast, for example. He wants to keep Brittney mentioned this, the energy cap or the emissions cap that the PBO has suggested could amount to the loss of 54,000 jobs. He wants to have the industrial carbon tax that will affect things like steel and aluminum, which are already reeling and just suffering like crazy because of Trump's tariffs. So those things he's actively said he doesn't want to change while he talks about protecting the economy and diversification. And I don't think you can have it both ways. Like the kind of change needed to properly diversify and protect our industries are exactly opposite to the things that he's remained committed to. So I don't know how he will square that circle, and maybe he'll end up being a lot more flexible as in government than maybe he was on the campaign trail. A lot of people sometimes are. And I hope for that. But until he makes some moves on those things, I don't know how his plan is going to work.
Yeah, Bob.
Geoff,
sorry.
Just one thing I wanted just to emphasize. I think I agree with much of what Carolina said. And Geoff, to your point about sort of disentangling ourselves from such a U.S. heavy, market position. Obviously, the Prime Minister is hoping to achieve something with the United States in the way of a renegotiated, I don't know if it's going to be Kuzma or what. But I think what he has said, and I think what the majority of Canadians believe, is that we can no longer trust the United States ever again the way that we did before. And so, casting forward, it's more about, how do we ensure that we're not in the same position that we have found, that we maybe should never have found ourselves in, but alas, this is where we are. How do we do that?
Yeah, and I agree. And I think about what the alternative would be if we decided to expand our gas exports to China, for example. That would provoke quite a debate. We already export a lot of gas to China, but if you're looking for a big market for natural gas, it's China. But Bob, just before we dug deeper into some of these contradictions, I would say the NDP or the Social Democratic movement has always been the most anti-free trade, the most pro-sovereignist, at least while I was paying attention. Is there a way for the NDP to find some new traction politically by emphasizing some of these questions as the next number of months unfold?
Yeah, I think there is. I think also that there's we're in, I just said to a colleague of mine the other day, I guess the climate is just all solved. We're all, everything's solved in the climate. Nobody talks about it anymore. It's all gone. It's all solved.
Climate change, I mean.
Yeah. And so it's, I think there are people out there, voters out there that are concerned about it, and that we have to talk about it more. And we just seem to be, in this election for sure, we just didn't talk about it at all. I didn't hear anybody talking about it in the election. And I think it's something that, younger people and, I just think people in general, as they notice events happening in their lives around the climate, they go, what's up with that? And what do we have to do? How do we change it? And so I think that's something that we as the Democrats have to look at, and a policy and industrial strategy that we should have that you can put both together. You can walk and chew gum. And I think that that's something we have to look at and come up with solutions that way. I just want to go back to a bit what Brittney was saying about Prime Minister and what he should be doing as far as looking forward, with the United States. One of the things that I think we have to do is to make sure that we understand what's going on right now. This guy down there is not going to last forever. And any deal we should be trying for short-term deals. Things that are short-term, that, stroke his ego or whatever, but is short-term, and playing chess with these guys rather than playing checkers. And I think that that's really critical. And when the smart people around him and stuff thinking about this should be considering, because I really think that we're not going to get something that's comprehensive with this guy down south, and it's going to be chaos. And so what we can do in the short term for probably the next 3.5 years to see what we can actually accomplish in the short term so that we can save some of the stuff that we have here and to just push it down. And not buy in, not take the bait, as I said, with what he's trying to do with our country. And I think that's really critical to look, getting some short-term deals, and also engaging provincially with the governors. One of the things where I worked with Gary Dewar on was having the relationship with the governors, the Western governors. It was unbelievable how much it paid off for us just doing trade, getting things done. And those are relationships that are already there. And I think that the Prime Minister be smart to be talking, and I know he's talking to the premiers, but to make sure that they're doing that work with the governors, because these guys, they want to be silent because, they're afraid of what's going on in Washington and afraid of retribution. But I think that you can work with them and try to get that, something accomplished with them, because they're feeling the pain too, and they know what's going to come. So.
One of the things, and I guess this is for you, Caroline, although it could be for any of you here today, but when we say we about our economy, I sometimes flinch because I know that significant parts of our economy are foreign owned. And so the ownership have shareholder responsibilities that are not necessarily to the public interest of Canada. And I think that's particularly true with the oil and gas sector, and may explain some of the behavior we see from Premier Daniel Smith on that front. Do you expect the West and this concern about separatism to manifest itself in pressure on Carney to do or not do various things in terms of his negotiations on the economy with Trump, and in terms of his management of the economy here? Will it play out differently for folks from there?
I think Carney is going to have to demonstrate convincingly that he has the interests of Alberta and BC and, the West generally, when he is in those negotiations. And so that, I think that really does mean, putting the emphasis on some of the, we talked about softwood lumber. That's a key one that well predates Trump. But if who knows, maybe this is just really pie in the sky, but if he could show progress on a file like that has been such a problem for so long, that would send a message to British Columbians. This is a guy who's governing for British Columbia. This is a good thing. And I use that as an example. It probably is a bit far-fetched because it's been such a intractable problem for so many different leaders, even when we had far more reasonable people down south. So I'm not claiming that I expect that by any means. But so I think with the Alberta separatism piece, I think they're doing what they can, I think, to put a great deal of pressure on a new prime minister to kind of simply give them what they're asking for, whether that's greater representation of their interests when it comes to industry, greater representation politically, since we're on the topic. So I think there's a lot that they want. I think that's a lever they're using that some may say in bad faith. It's not something you don't want to pull the separation alarm bell for just anything. So this is serious. The fact that Danielle Smith is facilitating sort of a referendum around that. I don't know what word I want to use. She has said that she would prefer, I think, to stay in Canada, but she's allowing the debate to kind of take place quite freely. Shows that there must be enough level of support in Alberta for her to even think that's a smart political move, if you know what I mean. But she must be hearing it from people if she's going to take a position like that, because otherwise it's just so high risk to go to say that. So I think that this is again the lever that they're pulling to get the attention and the actions that they want out of this prime minister. I don't know if it will succeed. I think it's a lever that you can really only pull very, very rarely. Like they can't say this next election if the Liberals win, and the next election if the Liberals win, and expect to have any credibility on the file. So they must be thinking that they have a moment right here and right now for the leverage, or to exert the leverage they want to get the kind of actions that they're hoping for out of Mark Carney.
Yep. By the same token, yeah. I was just going to come to you, Brittney. Go ahead.
Yeah.
And I actually don't even know the answer to this, but when is the Alberta general election scheduled? Is it in 2026?
2 years.
Yeah.
Depending on when a referendum would be scheduled, maybe that lines up really nicely.
I know this.
But,
I do think, just to jump back onto it though, it's like I do think it's such a risk because it's some of them. This might sound crazy to people, but some of just personally, my husband's an Albertan, and I'm, his family's Albertan, and I spend a lot of time in Alberta. And Albertans are, when you talk to them, or some of them, they've got the most Canada flags on Canada Day. They're patriotic people. It strikes me as so politically risky in some ways for Danielle Smith. And she must be looking at numbers that I don't have access to that tell her that there's a win in this. But I think it's.
Isn't it playing to her
party.
base though?
And it's a third party who's advocating for it. So she's able to say, look, I want to stay as a part of Confederation, or and then I'm going to let Alberta make the call.
That's a really good point, actually, is she's saying, and Bob, to your point with the base, for her to say, I'm going to shut down any talk of this whatsoever would cause her probably a great deal of internal problems, or at least with her support base. Whereas if she stands back and says, I prefer Canada, but I'm going to let you have your voice, honestly, maybe that's not a crazy path to take.
I remember Jason Kenney not, losing the leadership and people turning on him, and I think she's learned from that lesson.
Yeah, well, Kenny's certainly written some really enjoyable tweets about the Alberta separatism movement that I'd recommend anybody. But Brittney, coming back to you, I mean, in British Columbia, we had this huge battle with Alberta under an NDP government about the TMX pipeline. Now we're facing proposals for national grid stuff from New Democrats, from another national pipeline, putting gas through to Quebec. Doug Ford wants to put a tunnel under the 401 for something like 50 miles, which would cost $120 billion. How does Carney reconcile some of these, frankly, wacky proposals that would be nation building and nation saving? How's he going to manage that?
What do you mean? The east-west, if you're talking about the electricity grid, I mean, my gosh, I feel like we have been talking about that for, I don't know, well over a decade. I mean, I remember Premier Christy Clark and Premier Redford. They remember their frosty relationship. I mean, a huge part of that discussion was around TMX and then, supplying hydro to Alberta. And so I don't know. I feel like it's been something talked about for a very long time, and maybe it's not so wacky. But I mean, look, it's a whole new world order. So what was impossible 2 years ago, 1 year ago, I think now is maybe within the art of the possible. And I think, I'm hearing anecdotally, we talk about urban elites. Maybe I'm an urban elite. I'm hearing people talk about, for the first time in, recent memory, let's build more pipelines. Let's do this. Let's bring our energy to Tidewater. Stuff that people around me weren't saying 24 months ago.
You didn't hear that from Gregor Robertson until the last few weeks? No, I had to rewind and play that back, but he did say it, and very candidly. So, yeah, I agree. But I think the latter part of that is something we're seeing the provincial government struggle with, which is the actually getting it done. I mean, we've had these great ideas for years. We've never been able to get any of them done, even ones that everybody thought would be very smart, like just an intertie between Alberta and BC, for example, on electricity would have been something that would be very beneficial for a long time. And that I think is a further challenge for Carney, as David Eby is finding out, that when you say, well, we're going to get it done very quickly, everybody nods their head in agreement, very enthusiastic. But then 2 or 3 weeks later, the bill is in the House and the enthusiasm is very muted. So yeah, I think that's going to be a tricky one for him. Interprovincial trade boundaries are something nobody understands and therefore can be very supportive of eliminating. But some of these other ones people do get, I think. So, Bob, how quickly do you think that the NDP will have a new leader? Does it require a convention? And do you think you've already said you think it should be a longer process? If we had this call a year from now, would it all be done?
Well, yeah, longer process. I don't want it to go on for like a year. But I think they've got to decide. You know, they could actually, federal council could come and say, look, you know, we're going to have a leadership race in 2026 at some point, and we'll be setting the rules in December of this year or something like that. They don't have to like come out and say that we're having leadership right away. Don, you know, an interim leader and rebuilding the party, I think, is a good way to go in the short run. Mm-hmm. And to have the leadership, you know, getting towards the next federal election to build a little more momentum around it. That'll be an opportunity when people are paying attention to us again when we do that. So let's not do it all in the first year, and let's you know, work it out. Now, that's my personal opinion. What the party does, I'm not sure, but I think that's strategically, I think it's a better way of doing it. And you can have, you know, we could, you know, look at, you know, have a strategy coming out of council on what we're going to do. Like, what are we going to do now to rebuild the party?
Have a plan.
Yeah.
Okay.
God,
sounds good.
I have a plan.
Bob, is there any truth to the rumors about Mr. Davies contemplating a mayoral bid?
Yeah, I don't know. To be honest, like
that popped up everywhere. But yeah. I want to go quickly to Caroline. What does Pierre Poilievre's calendar look like, sort of from a party procedural standpoint? There's a caucus meeting this week, which will discuss what's up. They'll pick a House leader, I assume. What are the main steps he's got to get through in the next, say, 4 to 6 months?
Well, they've got the vote also on whether or not they adopt as a caucus the Reform Act, which is the one that gives the caucus members a great deal of power to determine whether or not a leadership review happens for Pierre. So that's a significant step. I think them adopting it isn't necessarily a statement on his leadership, though. I think that if they choose to take on that power for themselves, then they will use it at their discretion later on. And of course, they don't. You know, so I think that's a significant thing to keep an eye on. He's obviously got to win his election in Alberta to actually serve as an MP again in the House of Commons. So he's got that on his mind, and he'll obviously want to get back in the House as soon as humanly possible. And I think the timing, the soonest it can happen, doesn't get him into the House for this session. So I think it would be in a fall session. And so, yeah, and who they choose as their sort of effective leader in the meantime in the House of Commons will also be kind of interesting. Is it going to be somebody who's closely aligned with Pierre and his direction or not? Like, we'll see. And other than that, I mean, he'll just have to, I think there's a lot of speculation about his team and whether or not he should be making changes there. And I think he's going to have to determine whether he can demonstrate that he's sort of taken in some of the lessons from the campaign, you know, without making those kinds of adjustments, or if those kinds of adjustments are going to be necessary to demonstrate the kind of change that people may be asking for, changes around some of their media strategy, their candidate strategy, and a whole bunch of other pieces. So I think that's what that he'll be looking at. And then the kind of more general thing, of course, is just getting out there, talking to Canadians, getting that message kind of tightened up for the new world that we kind of exist in now, and looking ahead to whenever that next election might be.
Brittney, we've heard from the Prime Minister what his key dates are for the next couple of weeks, at least, cabinet and calling in the House to pass a bill for affordability, that kind of thing. What are you looking to see? What are the decisions he has to make that most intrigue you in the coming days?
Yeah, well, cabinet is a big one. I've talked about that a couple times already. You know, yeah, the stuff that needs to get done over the next 6 weeks, it's I don't want to say the procedural, but like, we've got to obviously the House needs to resume. It's interesting. The House has not been in session for a long time.
Mhm.
House needs to resume. Of course, if King Charles coming, need to table a budget. He's committed to Canada Day, July 1, for some specific measures, including interprovincial trade. So there is some stuff that he has to sort of, bang out. But yeah, I mean, I think the one that sort of folks are waiting for with bated breath is cabinet, and then of course, staff are getting appointed too, right? Like we've got to ensure that there's strong staffers in the Prime Minister's office, across ministers' offices as well, and the pool of talent might not be as deep as it was in 2015 when we had been out of government for a decade before. But I know they are professionalizing that process. They've got like a application process to submit resumes, and it's going to be done in a way that I don't think it's been done to date. So
You
yeah,
mean
it'll be interesting to see.
they might overlook the sign captain from certain key ridings and just go with merit? Sounds risky to me. But I do think the conversation shows that Mark Carney's got, if not a honeymoon, window of opportunity here before the other parties have dealt with the immediate fallout of the election, because the NDP has to get that permanent leader. Pierre Poilievre has to sort out those organizational details and get himself into the House, which I don't think is in
Mhm.
doubt, but it's going to take a number of months. And we'll see how quickly the negotiations with Trump carry on, because I can't tell whether public opinion is just hoping that we get the tariffs lifted and everything goes back to normal. We get back to December kind of thing, or whether there's real fire in the belly of Canadians for the kinds of more dramatic changes. I'm not sure yet whether public opinion sees it as an existential crisis that the political leadership does. Do any of you have views on that?
Oh, I think the public is so volatile these days, and people are so concerned about their own lives and what's going on in their lives. And this actually, the tariffs does, they can see that this might impact my job, might
Right into
impact
the
my,
household, yeah.
yeah, exactly, my household. So I think it's really hard to sort of, predict or speculate on where public opinion is going to be. Just look at what's happened in the last year around politics, and how quickly things have changed and done that. So I think I think again, I go back to, we have to, as political parties, make sure that we're listening to the public, knowing where they're at and not trying to lead them too quickly somewhere where they're not. Right now, we have this, trade war that is like taking up the public's mind. And Mr. Carney is in a position now here to lead. People want him to lead. They want him to get us out of this. And it's an opportunity for him there to do that, to be that leader. But after that, the same old stuff's going to be around affordability, what's going on, and how do you deal with that? Again, it's I don't envy his job.
No,
I think
Iris.
I think you're right, Bob. I think that we've talked a lot about Trump, and it makes sense because Prime Minister's with him today. But I mean, at least half of the electorate voted for something that voted a way that seemed to be that Trump was not the motivating factor for them. And I think I come from Port Coquitlam, that's where I grew up, the land of Brad West. Fun fact, served on student council. And what I mean, Port Coquitlam, just because of the way that gentrification more broadly and the suburbs are changing. My family has moved further east into the suburbs, and whether it's and those areas they voted conservative, and maybe they would have voted New Democrat for the NDP in previous elections, but for the reasons we've already discussed, they voted for the Conservatives. And so it is the urban rural divide is there, but I think there's also a divide around well, it is, I guess, affordability. Really, it's where people can afford to live. And yeah, Bob, I think you're right. Like I think people are hurting for sure.
And Brittany, just to continue on that point, and I totally agree. We have talked more about Trump than we probably should have in some ways, and Brittany explained why, because there's a lot of stuff happening literally today that relate directly to that man. But it is like not to lose sight of the fact that a lot of people did vote based on supreme frustration around the cost of living, housing, and then kind of more on a secondary level, things like public safety and the opioid crisis and things like that, where they think just whatever people have been doing, they haven't been doing it right. And those issues are not going to go away. I mean, but this will be interesting as Carney may indeed sort out a deal with Trump, and the world may go back to normal on that front, possibly, who knows? But it still leaves these like really difficult and significant problems to address right here. And speaking in the exact same neighborhoods as Brittany pointed out, and also in places like Surrey, there's no surprise that places like, that places like the North Shore where I live, you saw it go completely liberal, and people live in their homes and they feel quite comfortable. And I think I said this right at the beginning, why would they want to change? There's a lot of places that aren't like that, where they think like, my God, I will do anything for change. And in some regions where you wouldn't necessarily expect it. So unless Mark Carney can find ways to deal with these things, and I genuinely hope he does find ways to deal with these things, and these aren't going to go away, and they will absolutely drive this sort of the outcome of the next election.
Yeah, it's my own view as well. Just as we get to the next stage here of our discussion, which is always fun in the lounge, but there's huge risk here for provincial and for the federal level, in my view. And just take today's announcement about the film industry. The reality is we do subsidize the film industry, and we all agree that that's a good thing for the most part, but we seriously subsidize it to the tunes of hundreds of millions of dollars. And I think just the fact the president has named that as an irritation will chill a lot of American producers from filming in BC. And it's very difficult to know what David Eby or Mark Carney could do to change their minds on that score. I mean, anybody who's looked at the film industry knows that it's as footloose as they get, and they will make a decision on a 12-hour basis to shift the entire production to somewhere else. And there's a lot of states in the United States that will subsidize as well. So I think that that would become a very difficult validator of failure to confront some of the economic problems if you had that many, British Columbians suffering serious economic loss because of the tariffs, and thinking that perhaps more could have been done to help them out. So I think it's going to be a very tough time ahead on this front, because these issues are so closely linked. But anyway, that's for another show. It's time now to adjourn to the lounge for what we always do at the end of the show, which is raise a glass at the minibar, go to the minibar and raise a glass or take a shot at someone that you've seen out there in the political environment recently. So does anybody want to begin?
Yeah, I'll begin.
Okay, you go, Bob. You go first.
I'll begin. I'd like to raise my glass to Jagmeet Singh. Jagmeet was our leader for 8 years, and he was in a very difficult situation this campaign. But every day he went out and he smiled, he campaigned, he talked about things, circumstances people were facing, and he did a stellar job. And how many opposition leaders go back to actually get things done for people, get things done for people? When you're looking back, and there's so many people now that are actually getting dental care that couldn't afford it before. And that's because of our deal with the Jagmeet pushing that, and also the farmer care program, and also the replacement workers getting legislation on that for federal workers, or as we used to call it, the labor movement anti-scab legislation. He did all that, and he'll be remembered for that, not tomorrow or the next day, but in 10 years from now when they look back on that. So I want to raise a glass for him, and also his tolerance and what happened to his family. We usually just have white people running in our federally, and we don't experience some of the stuff he's experienced over the 8 years he's had in the campaign, and to have the courage to do that. And so I think I just want to raise a glass to Jagmeet and thank him for his job.
Thanks, Bob. Yep, I agree. Not a quitter, that's for sure. Many things, but not a quitter. Who else? Who's next?
I'll go. I find I often take a shot in this section of the show, and I think that's maybe my underlying cynicism. But today I'm going to be positive and raise a glass. I want to raise a glass actually to Pierre Poilievre and Mark Carney, and for very similar reasons. And it's two things. One thing each of them said. Pierre on election night, I thought, was a class act when he did his speech, which I thought was very humble and actually struck really the right tone. But when his supporters were disappointed, and in their disappointment they booed him, he settled them down and said, that's not what we're doing here. We're here to congratulate him and accept his win and move forward on that basis. And I thought that was a really positive message to send. And likewise, Mark Carney, when it came to calling the by-election in Alberta for Pierre, he was saying, I won't stand in the way. I'm going to let this happen as soon as possible, and I'm not going to play the political games. And he didn't have to do that either. So I actually thought, what a great way to start off a new session, or a new government, essentially, and on both the opposition and the government side, and a good message to send to Canadians that, they accept the seriousness of the time we're in, and they're going to be grown-ups about it.
Right.
Well, we should have closed with Caroline, because really, how lovely was that? It was just perfect.
Now you should take a cynical shot. Do it.
I'm going to take a cynical shot. I need to balance this panel out. So I'll take a shot at the CPC War Room. Now, I don't want to overstate that. I'm going to be careful to do that. But most of the polling leading up to Election Day showed that women overwhelmingly favored the Liberals over the Conservatives. I think one poll showed 49% of women for the Liberals and only a measly 33% for the Tories. And now maybe this will be the Bradley effect, and polling after Election Day will show otherwise. But whoever made the call that they could skate by without the women's vote, I hope this is the election where a major political party can base a strategy on appealing to only men, or where they can juice other segments of the population to make up for it. I really, that's my shot. I'm taking a shot there.
Okay, well, I'm gonna saw on another leg at the table and take a shot at Mark Carney, who I thought did a great job of rolling out the plans for the first week, and I liked a lot of stuff he hopes to do, although I'm skeptical he'll get to do it or be able to do all of it. But I don't like King Charles reading the speech from the throne. I mean, talk about a retro off-brand signal. We have an Indigenous woman, Governor General, who would do a terrific job, and I guess there's some disrespect to King Charles. I won't pretend there's none there. I'm kind of a Republican. But yeah, we should have kept with Mary Simon, Prime Minister. Bad call. And don't make that mistake again. Okay, that's my shot. So I want to thank all our guests today, especially the ones here with us right in the room, Bob Dewar and Brittney Kerr, Caroline Elliott. Thank you so much. Lots of great wisdom there for everybody. And to all of you, our guests who've come to Hotel Pacifico in BC, of course. You can check out maybe, but you can never leave. And I want to thank also our great sponsors, TELUS and Fortis PC. So thanks, everyone, and see you in a week with some of our familiar faces like Mike McDonald and Kate Hammer back in their chairs.